lectures each January. Brother Rick?
It is always a great pleasure to be able to come to the lectureship here, the Midwest Lectures, and to enjoy the fellowship and the company of the good brethren here at the 39th Street congregation, as well as the sister congregations that help support this particular work. I'm always grateful for the invitation to be with you, and my wife and I are always encouraged during the lectureship, and we're especially blessed as we leave and we take that encouragement back to Nesbit, Mississippi. And I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to be with you today and to hear these wonderful lessons. I'm going to ask you to turn in your Bibles to the book of Job. In the book of Job is where our question arises, in Job chapter 2 and verse number 9. And if I might just give you a hint that you probably already know, the question is asked by Job's wife. And it is interesting about questions. You don't always know about the motive for a question. Sometimes the motive of a question is designed to entrap you in a particular philosophy or doctrine. Sometimes a question is asked from a genuine sincerity to know the truth. Sometimes a question is asked to direct your attention to a particular doctrine or a particular item. And in this case, we see that the motive of the question is stated for us by Job's wife when in chapter 2 and verse number 9, it follows up with curse God and die. We get a little bit of her motive behind the reason why she is asking that question. Well, in relationship to that, what I would like for us to do today is to spend a little time in the book of Job to explore the question that is asked. The context is going to be quite revealing as to not only what does integrity mean. Now remember, this is Job's wife who asked the question, "Dost thou still retain thine integrity?" But she is not the first one to speak of Job's integrity. Someone greater than Job's wife has already identified in the context Job's integrity. And so I do want to spend a little bit of time today looking at the idea of Job's integrity. That does seem to be at the heart of her question. And so if you will turn back with me to Job chapter 1 and verse number 1, then we find there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. Now notice how the Bible describes Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. There's a good hint as to the definition of integrity. We're going to see several hints in this context, and then Job is going to have some friends, and I do not mean the friends of chapter 2, but I mean Job is going to be associated with some other individuals that also will be defined as men of integrity, and so I want to look at them as well in order to describe the ideal of integrity. But I also want us to note the powerful point that is made by the book of Job and why Job's patience, why Job's integrity is so important, and it's the keynote of this entire book. And why that is so important even for us today, and the relationship that Job had with God. Now, if you look down at verse number 3, as you get past the sustenance of Job, all of the assets that he had 7,000 sheep, he had 3,000 camels, he had 500 yoke of oxen, he had 500 she-donkeys. I'll use that term, Brother Bill. He had 500 she-donkeys and a very great household. This is after it is described of his 7 sons and 3 daughters. Then if you look down at verse number 5, and you get down toward the middle of the statement, it says, "And Job sent and sacrificed," or sanctified them, "and rose up early in the morning, and offered burnt offerings according to the number of all of them." That is, according to his sons and his daughters, when they gathered themselves together, as they did for family time, we might say. It is possible, Job thought in his mind, that when they gathered themselves together, that his sons or his daughters could have involved themselves in sin. Now, if Job, as I understand it, was written during the patriarchal dispensation, maybe between the time of Noah and the time of Abraham, then Job is fulfilling his patriarchal responsibility. As the head of the household, as the father over all of these families, his job was to serve as a high priest for that family. And so he is engaging in what Aaron and the Levites would have engaged in under the Mosaic dispensation. He is actually engaging in what Jesus would engage for us in the Christian dispensation. He is serving as a priest of God for his family. And so he is engaged in that religious activity, the idea of worship and service before God. That also identifies, does it not, something about his integrity. Now, beginning in verse number 6, we find that we're actually transported to a different scene now. We have a little bit about Job, but now we find that Job has caught the attention of the Lord God Almighty. And in verse number 8, it says that as Satan comes before God, that the Lord said unto Satan, "Hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil." And so again, we get the hint of Job's life. And that Job wasn't an individual who just claimed to be a godly man. He actually lived a godly life. And a godly life means that, like Romans chapter 12 and verse number 9, that my love must be without dissimulation. It must be without hypocrisy, which means that I must abhor that which is evil. I must eschew evil, but I must cleave unto that which is good. We see that being demonstrated in Job's life. Now, Satan brings up a scenario that the only reason why Job is doing this is because God has built a hedge around Job. In other words, Job is a blessed man, and the only reason why he is serving God is because of the blessings. And so God allows Satan to activate, at least to some extent, into Job's life some difficulties, so that Job's life is not just about all of the blessings. And so in verse number 12, the Lord said unto Satan, "Behold, all that he had," the sustenance, the assets that we read about earlier, "all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put forth not thy hand. In other words, don't touch Job. You can touch everything that he has. You can take everything from him, but you cannot touch him. Now in verse number 13, we are transported back to earth. We are transported back to the scene where Job is now living, and it says, there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and there came a messenger. Now, I have this underlined in my Bible, and I would encourage you to at least highlight it in your mind, because this is an important aspect. Every verse from here on out is going to have a messenger that's going to come to Job. And so you find in verse number 14, there came a messenger. Verse number 16 now, while he was yet speaking. While that first messenger was still speaking, then another messenger came. Verse number 17, while he was yet speaking, while the second messenger was still delivering his message, guess what? Here comes another one. Verse number 18, while he was yet speaking, there comes another messenger. Now, we think that 2020 is bad, right? We think that we've had a lot of difficult days in our lifetime. I assure you that I have not in 2020, and I will come pretty close to saying that you have not either experienced in the entirety of 2020 what Job experiences in one day. One day, all of this. While this is happening, something else occurs. So let's go back to verse number 14. There came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the donkeys feeding beside them, and guess what? The Sabaeans come by and they take everything and they slaughter all of Job's servants. All of his workmen, all of his workforce is now gone, and his wealth, his assets, his sustenance is being drained from him. Verse number 16, it's his sheep that now are gone. Only one servant escapes each time. Verse number 17, it is all of his camels. Now they are gone. So all of his ability to gain wealth, all of his assets, all of his sustenance are now gone, and Job is left, I guess you could say from one vantage point, penniless. He is left without the ability, as he had before, to continue to gain that wealth. But the day ain't over yet. Verse number 18, while he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in the elder brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the four corners of the house. And it fell on the young men, and they all died, and I only am escaped to tell thee. So now not only has Job lost all of his assets, but now he's lost all of his family, save his wife. That is, he's lost all of his sons in this event. Now, what was Job's response? Job's response defines for us what true integrity is. See, integrity is easy if everything is going fine. That was the devil's argument, right? Job is a man of integrity because everything is running smoothly. You take that smoothness away from his life, and we'll really get to see who Job is, and Job will curse you to your face. Is that what Job did? Shake your head. No, that's not what he did, right? It says, then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell down to the ground, and worshipped. He continued his service to God. He worshiped God. He went on his knees or prostrated himself to give honor and glory and to recognize the majesty of the Lord God Almighty. That is the word worship here. The King James has this correct. He worshiped Him. Just as He had done before, He does so again. But notice, in that worship, He makes this statement. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Now notice this. Notice the worship statement. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job lost everything as far as his assets and his sons were concerned, and yet he still praises God, regardless of the difficulty of the situation. I want you to pause just for a second here, and I want to ask you to transport yourself to a different scene. Now you're at the judgment day. And on the judgment day, we have record that every man's going to give account of himself. That the sheep are going to be separated from the goats, and you happen to be on the side of the sheep. That would be the right side over here. You happen to be on y'all are goats over here, by the way, but the sheep are all over here on the right side, and you just so happen to be standing by Job. And you're going on and on, talking to everybody around you about how bad 2020 was for you. About the difficulties of your life. And Job is listening to your conversation. And you turn, maybe you don't recognize who Job is, and you turn to, let me introduce myself. And he says, I'm Job. And then all that conversation, can you imagine having that conversation about your life during these difficult times in front of a man like Job? It kind of pales in comparison, doesn't it? Not that we compare difficulties, but I don't want to have that conversation in front of Job. My life ain't anything compared to the life that Job had on this particular day. And by the way, it ain't over yet. Because we're going to be transported to another scene away from the Ur of the Chaldees, and now we're going back up when the sons of God and the devil come before God again. And that's chapter 2. By the way, the summary statement of chapter 1 is again a recognition of the word integrity. Is it? In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. I want you to keep a note right there. At this point, Job has not made any statement against God that he would regret. A little bit later, that will not be true. But right now, it is true, and that's a part of the definition of integrity. Now, the sons of God are there. We're transported to that scene, and it says in verse number 2, and the Lord said unto Satan. Verse number 3, the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil. And notice this, and still he holdeth his, there's our word, integrity. God tells us that Job is a man of integrity. In fact, he says, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. So Satan then poses this scenario before God. Yes, you've taken everything from Job, and a man, that's skin for skin, he says there. But you put forth thy hand now and touch him in his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to your face. And so God allows Satan now, before he said, you can take everything that Job has, just do not touch his person. Now he allows Job's person to be touched. And we find in verse number 6, the Lord said, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. And so Satan went, you remember, from the presence of the Lord, verse number 7, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what this actually is, but there are a lot of different ideas from the idea of black leprosy all the way to the idea of some kind of what was it called? Babylon boils, and there's some different ideas. But here's what we do know about it. It's defined as, it's called a boil, but I want you to notice that Job's body, chapter 2 and verse number 12, is covered with an itchy, irritating, unrecognized. He's unrecognized. When his friends come, they are amazed. They don't even recognize Job, and to the extent that they shut up for 7 days. These are his friends. They've made an appointment with one another to come and to give their friend comfort and aid during this time. But they are so amazed at how horrific the boils are on Job that they actually just sit there in silence for 7 days. Here's what it says at the end of verse number 13. For they saw that his grief was very great. He lost his sustenance. He's lost most of his family, all of his children, and he's lost now his ability to work any of that stuff back. He is sick to the point where he cannot work. There was a continual burning pain in Job's life, Job chapter 3 and verse number 24. In fact, if Job 7 and verse number 5 is an indication and it's not a figure of speech, there's actually a maggot kind of insect that is eating on his skin at this particular time. I don't have any pictures. I had to turn away yesterday when the leprosy idea was shown here. I got a weak stomach with regards to that. And just hearing what Job is going through, I've got a fairly weak stomach in regards to that. Job is miserable at this particular time. And so it is important that we understand the situation that Job finds himself in. Now, Job at this time, in this context, is asked by his wife, dost thou still maintain or retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. Get this over with. Is there anything in this world, is the mentality of his wife, is there anything in this world that is worth suffering for? See, her philosophy is there is some things that's just not worth it. But that's not the condition of Job's heart. Job is saying what I'm going through right now is worth suffering for. Listen, ladies, if I might just insert something here in our lesson. It is important that you support your man to be a man. It is important that you understand that he has certain responsibilities upon his shoulders, and it's important that he bear that responsibility. If you're always taking it for him, then you are not helping him. Job's wife was not helping him, even if she saw it from that point. I just can't tolerate you to be in so much pain. Curse God and die. Get it over with. That may be her mentality, but it's the wrong philosophy. That's not a godly philosophy in regards to that. But now, I want to pause here. We have this scene of his three friends They're listed for us in verse number 11, and they're called Job's three friends. I almost wish that the Hebrew had quotation marks around that, because they do not, and even quotation marks, they came to comfort him, but I'm not sure they gave him any comfort when they opened their mouth. The first 7 days, they gave him a lot of comfort by just shutting up. But now they're going to offer their advice as to why they're going through this, right? There are a lot of individuals, when people are suffering and people have died, and you go to the family and you try to comfort them. I wish some people would shut up. When they begin to say, oh, God needed your child in heaven, so shut up. That's not what the Bible, God need, shut up. Don't say nothing. If you don't have Bible to say it, shut up. They did their best job for the first 7 days. And then after that, there is a series of Job. This is the reason why you're engaged in this. Everything from Calvinism and fatalism is preached by these three friends of Job. Be careful when you quote out of the book of Job. If you're quoting from these guys, you're not quoting God. God authorized it to be written, but you might as well be quoting Satan in Genesis chapter 3 as to quote these individuals. Now, sometimes they get pretty close. Have you ever noticed that somebody who loves to spread a lie likes to get real close to the truth? Half of their statement is true. A lot of what Satan said in the beginning, when he said, thou shalt surely not die, everything but the not was true, right? It was a pretty good statement up until the negative was inserted. And so it is important then that we understand what the book of Job is. Now, I want to take a step back here, because I want to turn your attention to Genesis chapter 6. Now, in Genesis chapter 6, you will recognize that scene as the scene in which we find a man by the name of Noah, right? In Genesis chapter 6 and verse number 5, we find that God saw the wickedness of man, that it was great in the earth, that every imagination of the thoughts in his heart was only evil continually. Can you get any worse of a description of a society than what is said right here? I don't think so. But now in verse number 8, it says, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Verse number 9 describes Noah and his character. Noah was just and perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. Now you might be saying, why are we going back to Noah? Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. But I want to turn your attention to Hebrews chapter 11, right? Hebrews chapter 11 and verse number 6 identifies for us, verse number 7 says, by faith Noah, there's our second character, being warned of God of things not seen, yet moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of righteousness, which is by faith. Now, 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse number 5 is going to describe Noah as a preacher of righteousness, right? A preacher of righteousness. Now turn, if you do not mind, with me to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. Again, you might be asking yourself the question, why are we going to other people? I want to know what Job is about to go through. I want to know about all of that. Well, I want you to pay attention here to, and I've got to hurry or I'm going to run out of time. But I want you to notice here in Daniel chapter 1 and Daniel chapter 1 and verse number 5, the Chaldeans have captured the people of Judah, and it says they're looking for a certain kind of person. Daniel fits the bill. He was without blemish. well-favored, skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge, understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and in whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Daniel was not just one of the men. He rose to the cream of the crop. He was the top dog among all of those that were skillful in knowledge and wisdom. He was the top consultant to 3 different regimes during his lifetime. But notice verse number 8 as it begins. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. We get a little bit more about the idea of character and integrity in that. Verse number 17. And all these 4 children, that would include Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel, it says, had understanding in visions and dreams. Chapter 2 and verse number 14. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom. Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse number 3 makes an interesting statement, to whereas evidently Daniel was known as was Solomon in his time. Daniel was a wise man, and it says, is this man as wise as Daniel, you see? And so that becomes very important, because I want you to turn over to Ezekiel chapter 14 now. In Ezekiel chapter 14, and we're still really working on this idea, we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what integrity is all about. So in chapter 14 and verse number 14 of Ezekiel, it says, though these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, you see, these 3 men of integrity. But I do want you to notice something else as well. Even though these 3 men were there in that city, and they prayed for that city would not survive. Nobody in that city, not even their own children, would survive. Only they themselves, because they are men of integrity. So you have a preacher of righteousness, you have a wise man, and you have a patient man, according to James chapter 5. Stability. A man who is able to abide under the pressure and difficulty of any kind of persecution. That is integrity. If you want to find out whether or not a man is truly a New Testament Christian, do not call him faithful just because he is here during the good times. If he is here during the bad times, if he is able to endure through all of the difficulty, that's when God says, have you seen my servant Job? There is a man of integrity. He practices what he preaches, but he does so under the most difficult of circumstances. That's when you really find out what a man is all about. By the way, that context goes all the way down to verse number 20, and he mentions those 3 again. But I want to turn your attention now to Job chapter 31. Job chapter 31, and I want you to notice verse number 15. Up until this time, Job has maintained his integrity. But he's about to do something that you need to be careful of. See, sometimes when we have gone through the difficult times of life, Elijah withstood 450 prophets of Baal. But when Jezebel put out a contract on his life, he ran like a scared man away. The greatest height of his integrity before God, and then the next thing is where he runs. You find that several times. Moses, one of the meekest men on the face of the earth, yet he so smote when he was supposed to speak to the rock, and he did not do what God asked him to do. He had done that all the way through all of this until that time. Job had maintained his integrity. But now notice what he does. Verse number 35. Oh, that one would hear me. Behold, my desire is the Almighty would answer me. Where is God to give me an answer? You ought to be careful about asking for an answer from God. Pharaoh, you remember in Exodus chapter 5, was it? Asked God, he said, or told Moses, he says, who is the Lord that I should obey His voice? And you know what? God reached out His hand with 10 plagues and said, let me introduce myself to you. God is fixing to introduce Himself to Job in such a way that Job is going to be ashamed of making this statement. Chapter 38 and verse number 1 and 2, out of a whirlwind, Job is answered by the Lord. And notice how the Lord starts these series of questions, right? He's going to pepper Job with question after question after question, and Job doesn't have the answer to any of them. But notice, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Job, you ask, now I'm going to give you an answer. Look at verse number 18. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it, if thou knowest all. Job, you've asked me, and I'm going to engage you in a series of questions. Now I'm asking you for an answer. In verse number 21, knowest thou it because thou was then born, or because the number of thy days is great? You think you live so long upon this earth that by your experience you can tell me what the answer is to any of these? By the way, if you look down at chapter 40, the Lord continues this series of questions. And shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? Did you think that you were going to, when you were asking for an audience with me, that you were going to tell me something I didn't know? And he says, he that reproveth God, let him answer it. Come on, Job. If you got the answer, where's the answer? And Job said, behold, I am vile. See, Job's getting the point, but God ain't done with Job yet. God says, put on your big boy pants now. You think that those answered questions were tough? Put on your big boys. Notice here, he says, then answered the Lord out of Job. Job says, I'm not going to answer God anymore. I'm going to be quiet. That's what he says in verse number 5. But verse number 6, God answers him and says, gird up thy loins like a man. Put on your big boy pants, in other words. That would be a Popejoy paraphrase right there. Notice verse number 8. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that I mayest be righteous? In other words, what are you going to teach me that I would be righteous in all of these things that I've just allowed? Then will I also, verse number 14, confess thee that thine own righteous hand can save thee. Job, are you strong enough to save yourself? Look, by the way, isn't it interesting? He begins to talk about the behemoth after this. And then he immediately goes into a discussion of the Leviathan. Job, are you strong enough to battle the beast that I have created? The answer is no. Verse number 11 of chapter 41, he says, who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole earth is mine. And then Job comes to this conclusion in verse number 42 as well. Job realizes that he has made a mistake in what he has done. And Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do anything or everything, and that no thought can be withholden of thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered that I have understood not things too wonderful for me. Now notice this, which I knew not. You see, sometimes we can be strong, and then we can begin to say that strength is enough to sustain me without Christ, without the Word of God. Now it's my wisdom. Now you need to listen to what I have to say. A lot of individuals get so smart that they think that they have the answer for the world rather than God having the answer for the world. Let me tell you what God meant. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, let me tell you what God meant there. I said, I don't care what you think God meant. Just to be blunt about it, I don't care. What did He say? Tell me what He said. Now, if God tells us what He meant, I'm okay with that. But your think-sos is no worse off than my think-sos. And so Job needed to learn this. Whew. We've covered 42 chapters and half of the books of the Bible. Ezekiel, I didn't get to James. I didn't get to Jesus' statement in the Beatitudes about how blessed we are to undergo persecution. But you can make some of these applications yourself, right? These are applications. Consider the prophets and the fact that they endured such conflict against themselves while they were doing right. Listen, it is not, and Job had to learn this, and we had better learn this, it is not a good thing for us to question the integrity of God, for us to question the manner in which God runs His universe. You realize that He didn't wake you up this morning and ask you whether or not He should raise up the sun, right? God is perfectly in control of His universe. When did we ever lose sight of that? Did we lose sight of God being in control of the universe during the coronavirus? Have we lost the fact that God is in control of His universe and we become anxious in everything in our life, and rather than knowing that we serve a God who is in control, when He says it is done, it is done. All I need to do is take a step back and say, whatever comes my way. You know what? I've appreciated these young ladies down here all morning sitting around. I know there are other young folks, and there's some over there too. Well, some of them are older than others. But I appreciate all of y'all being here, paying attention, and you're going to get to a point in your life where you may be here today, but what about when you're 16? Are you still going to remain in your integrity to God? What about when you're 18 or you ship off to college? Are you still going to remain with your integrity? When you're searching for a husband, young ladies, are you going to begin looking at a worldly man? Or are you going to retain your integrity and search for a godly man? Young men, there are a lot of women out there that look good, and they are as nasty as anything that you'll ever taste in your life. Stay away from them. Are you going to, when you're searching for a girlfriend or a mate, are you going to maintain your integrity? Why does God want me to do it this way? Why does God want us to always, my friends do this, and the denominational world has acted this way. The government tells me to do this. Will we, in all of the difficulty of 2020, when 2021 gets here, January the 1st, will God be able to say to us, or about us, have you seen my servant? The brethren at the 39th Street congregation, the brethren in Nesbit, Mississippi, they maintained their integrity. I pray that that will be said of us. God bless.
Thank you, Rick.